Make It Right, the manufacturing podcast.
I recently read a statistic that said there were almost 4.5 billion users of the internet. Of that, approximately 15% have a disability that could impact the ease with which they find what they're looking for. As a business, they could be looking for you. But if you aren't doing some basic things to make your website accessible, then you could be missing out on significant opportunities. And these adjustments aren't as daunting as you might think. This week on Make It Right, my guest is going to walk us through some ideas and approaches to help you get started getting your website accessible. I'm Janet Eastman, and I'm pleased to have Jeff White of Kula Partners as my guest. Jeff is a user experience and usability expert with over 25 years of experience. Jeff, you're going to load us up with some great ideas. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Janet.
My pleasure. So, why is it so important for B2B manufacturers to get this website accessibility thing right?
I think that there's a number of reasons. And I mean, what we're going to talk about today obviously doesn't just apply to B2B manufacturers. It applies to absolutely anybody who is putting a site out there that, if you are sharing information about your company on the web, you should be ensuring that that information is available to just about everyone. Because the fact of the matter is, like you said in the intro, there's a significant portion of the population that are using the internet with a disability, and we're not necessarily thinking about their needs as we create sites, as we build marketing strategies and implement tactics. Most people, and it's not through any sort of form of they're not trying to make their lives more difficult. They're just not necessarily aware that this is even a thing that they need to be considering. And aside from simply having a site that is accessible and available to anyone with a disability, whether that's a vision issue or an auditory issue where they can't hear things properly, or cognitive disabilities or other physical disabilities. We have a large portion of the population that isn't able to do things in the way that normally abled bodies are actually able to do so. So we have to enable a number of different things within our web properties in order to make sure that those people can access them appropriately.
Right. So, some of the challenges that the visually and hearing impaired would have with a website are pretty obvious. But what are some of the things that most web designers just aren't recognizing and continue to get wrong?
Well, I think that there's a number of things, and luckily we have a series of guidelines. It's called the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that are put out by the World Wide Web Consortium. And currently, I think we're in version 2.1 of that document. And basically what it describes is all of the different things that we should be doing as web developers and designers and marketers to ensure that the sites that we're creating are available to people. And it goes to a number of different things. It's the overall structure of the site, ensuring that we're using language and navigation that makes it obvious as to what we're hoping people are going to be able to click on or navigate to within the site, and making it easy to understand what's available to them as options when they arrive. It's providing alternatives for rich media. So if you have video files or audio files, ensuring that those have captioning or transcripts in order to be read if they cannot be heard. It's using high contrast on all of the different elements within the site, especially as it moves down into smaller text and smaller content. And that's where there's kind of a ramping effect within the YCAG guidelines that goes from A to AAA, where as you move up through that, it becomes more and more stringent as to the level of contrast that needs to be created in order to ensure that things can be read, and that they're fully accessible on all types of devices. Because, as mobile has long since surpassed desktop devices from a number of users' perspective. In a lot of the sites that we develop, mobile can be up to 60% or even more. So ensuring that things work well and are easily accessible on small screens is as important as ensuring that they work well on a great big monitor or a laptop. So what a lot of designers just aren't necessarily thinking of is just the extra time that they're going to need to take as they build a site to implement these measures. And what a lot of marketers aren't necessarily thinking of is the extra effort it's going to require on their part to ensure that they're implementing alternative content for people with disabilities.
So, Just so that we understand, what are the tools that the visually and hearing impaired are using to navigate the web?
Well, it's actually, today is a much better time to be using assistive technologies because they're actually built into a lot of the devices that we all own now, even if you haven't turned it on, within your iPhone or an Android phone or a modern Macintosh computer or even Microsoft Windows based PCs. A lot of the assistive technologies for screen reading, for creating higher contrast text and things like that are actually built into the operating systems now. On top of that, there are other third-party platforms that people can use. There are even systems that will translate written text into Braille, for example, for blind users. So there are a number of different tools that are available to people, and designers should be testing as best they can. I mean, obviously, we're not all going to rush out and purchase different assistive devices and assistive software, but there are a number of things that we can do and platforms that we can use to actually test against to see if our sites are being made accessibly.
So you mentioned earlier that marketers and web developers need to understand that this is going to take a little bit extra time to get it just right. When we talk about extra time, what are we talking about? Because I think that there are people that are going to go, oh my, this is going to be a really arduous and daunting task. So, what does it take? How much extra time does it take?
I think the time thing, if you're redesigning your website, it's probably not going to be a massive undertaking in order to do this. You just think about it from the beginning and from the start, and you can be, considering that and probably only adding, an extra 5 or 10% to the overall time that's required. Where I think it gets a little bit more difficult is for people who have existing platforms and existing sites with a lot of content in them, and going back and retrofitting some of these things can actually be a bit more daunting. So I think really, the key message is if you're building a new site or redesigning your current site, now's the time. Work with a designer or a developer that understands this and ensure that they can actually get these things implemented for you. And if you've got an existing site, you can start by picking off some of the lower hanging fruit, such as, going through your site and ensuring that any rich content and rich media has alternative content. So any videos have closed captioning, any podcast have transcripts, any images have alternative text that describes the photo or the illustration. Where you're then going to have to do a little bit more work, and it's probably going to have some additional cost, is kind of having a designer or developer go through the site and enable things for keyboard navigation, for example, to ensure that users who are visually disabled can actually tab through the different navigational elements in your site, or skip the navigation and move straight to the content to have it read to them. So those are some of the things that are going to be more difficult to do, especially if you have hundreds or thousands of pages of content. But they're absolutely necessary. And I think that there's another angle to this as well, because not only is it something that you need to be considering, especially given the size of modern B2B buying committees being so enormous. I mean, Gartner was saying a couple of years ago that there was 8 people in each buying committee. Now they're saying it's as high as 14.
Hmm.
And just given the percentage of disabled, the numbers that I have are largely around the American population, but given that percentage, I mean, there's a good chance that there could be someone with a disability on the buying committee that is looking to work with your company. So, putting your best foot forward is certainly a big part of that. As I was kind of getting to a moment ago, there's a whole cottage industry of lawsuits that are popping up using the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 508 of that in order to actually sue companies that haven't made their websites accessible.
So this is something that they've been asking people to make they being, whoever it is, people, to make their websites more accessible for a long, long time. And now that lawsuits are coming, I know that when I talked to you on the phone prior to this podcast, you had said that some very famous people have been sued because their websites are not accessible. So this is something that, I mean, we have to reach this population and we have to get it right. Are there people out there who, I mean, I know that you've got 25 years experience in this, but are most web developers versed in this information?
I don't think they are,
Mm,
honestly. I think they should be, but I do think that things are, the tools that we use for developing for the web are getting better and better. The trouble is that if you're not starting a site design with accessibility in mind, it gets harder and harder the longer you go down the path of building it in order to implement it. So, for every site that we build, we do an accessibility audit at every stage. So
mhm,
when our interface designers are designing the initial comps of the homepage, for example, our QA guy is looking at them and saying, okay, this actually meets the contrast ratios that we need to have. This doesn't. As designers, we love to have little subtle things like 20% gray text on a white background or something like that, and while it looks lovely, it's just not visible to people with low vision. So, those are things that need to be considered from the very beginning of those projects. Whereas I think, if people are using pack or themes for their WordPress site or other things like
mhm.
that, they may not be thinking about those things as they're deploying that theme. They're just looking at it and saying, this looks nice, it fits our brand, and off they go. And the longer that you wait to put these to put this into practice, the harder it's going to be, as I was saying earlier, to be able to do it well and to not have it cost a lot of extra money.
Mhm. But you're saying that, somebody who does buy a theme or uses any one of these website builder type services, I think of Wix or whoever is out there, um, are these website builder programs easy to implement all this accessibility into?
I think a lot of them are. It's there if you look for it. So I mean, even
Okay.
um, the area in WordPress to enter alternative text for an image has been there forever. A lot of people, as they're populating content in their site, they skip over that because they've got hundreds of images to put in, so they just keep going. But
Well,
what we
and then
need,
they probably, if you're like me, I didn't know what that was really for.
yeah, and maybe
Right?
that
And you
the
just
web
told
develop
me and a light bulb came on and I went, "Oh, that's why they always ask that."
Yeah, exactly. And but I mean you know, with with devices having assistive technology built in, it's in your iPhone and all of that. And social media companies have done a really good job of this, but not a great job of promoting that it's there. I mean, in Instagram, you can put alternative text for every photo and video that you upload. Same thing on Twitter, same thing on LinkedIn, same thing on Facebook. Those tools are there. It's just like we're looking at it and saying, okay, I've got to get this up, this social post has to go live, and we're putting in the photo and we're putting in the overall body text and the link, and not really thinking of what's going to happen if somebody accesses that without the ability to see what we're doing.
Mhm. Well, and I guess ultimately it's raising that awareness because I mean, I learned something from every podcast, but the big light bulb, you just turned it on for me. I didn't know why I was supposed to put that alternative text in there. Now I completely understand why that's so important and why they even asked me to do that, which is great. Thank you, Jeff.
No problem.
So, can you share some stories? Because you've worked with a lot of companies, but companies that may have done this accessibility thing and the results that they've seen from doing that, or some horror stories where people haven't done it and the troubles they've run into.
Well, I think there's a number of different things, and as I mentioned before, we kind of approach this from every project that we do. So for us, it's just innate. It's something that we think about. It's something that we're passionate about. I know that there are lots of other web developers who are passionate about it as well. The one thing that's really interesting about this is that a well-built, accessible website is not just a good thing for people with disabilities. It's a good thing for everybody, because a site that is built to be accessible is also built very well for organic search optimization. And a lot of people don't realize that. Like, if you simply take the time to enable these features to design with accessibility in mind, you're not just making sure that people who have low vision or auditory issues or other things like that are able to access it. You're also ensuring that Google likes your site better. which is a beautiful hidden benefit of
Hmm.
creating a site using semantic code and properly contrasting content and all of those different things. So I think that there are, there are the obvious things that go into this, and then there's the hidden benefits. Not getting sued obviously is a bit of a benefit, but um, for us, we have, we go to market, and when we talk with a new client and we're approaching a web build, we're letting them know that this is something that we're going to be considering off the top. And it's something that we're going to be training them on as we go through and help them enter the content into the site. And we're training the marketers to be thinking about this so that after we're no longer involved and they're continuing to add content and blog posts and other stuff in their site, promoting social content and things like that, that they're actually going through and keeping that in mind to ensure that their site maintains that accessible angle. Um, so I think that we haven't had a client who has had any particular horror stories about this, but we certainly have read plenty of stories about this. Domino's just settled a lawsuit in the last 6 months. I think it might have been a little bit longer ago than that. Where their pizza builder is not accessible, and they were basically refusing to fix that and have been fined a fairly hefty fine in order to ensure that they do this going forward. It all kind of came to a head about a year ago when Beyonce was sued because one of her fans was unable to purchase a sweatshirt on her site because it simply wasn't accessible. And so I think these stories help to spread the gospel, if you will, of accessibility, and ensure that people are thinking about this as they go into the design of their site, and as they're adding more content, and as they're implementing their marketing strategy. Hopefully they're kind of continuing to consider the importance of making this site available to everybody.
Hmm. Okay, I'm going to get you to recap a couple of things. So, can you just provide some simple and effective tips to help companies start making some of these valuable changes that can significantly impact their accessibility on their websites?
For sure. And I think the first place to start is providing text alternatives. So any illustrations, any photographs, or anything that's not text based on your site, you can go into your content management system, whether that's Wix or WordPress or anything like that, and there will be a box there where you can enter alternative content for that. And the thing to consider there is, don't just say this is a photo in that alternative text. Describe what it is. Provide some context so that when people who can't see the image can actually get the benefit of what's in it. Um, the If you're using video, you should be looking to turn on closed captioning within that. And one of the great things about a lot of these tools is that sites like YouTube actually will do this for you automatically. They'll listen for the voices that are in your piece, and will actually automatically add captions. You can go through and edit those and make sure that they're correct, but the ability to do that is there.
And that's
So
inexpensive, isn't it, Jeff? Like, I mean, I've used this with other companies, and it's really inexpensive to get even a long video closed captioned and very quickly. Like,
yeah,
it's not even like 2 days. It's like almost instantaneous with
it
some
is.
services.
Yeah, no, it works really, really well. And transcribing a podcast, there are plenty of
Mhm.
services out there that will do this. There are some that do it in an automated way using technology that could be as cheap as 1 cent per minute, and others are charging about $1 or slightly less per minute of recorded audio. So even that is relatively inexpensive and then requires a bit of editing, but it's just so easy. And I mean, again, the brilliant benefit of having a transcript of any audio on your site is that Google doesn't necessarily listen to the audio, but it will certainly index the text. So
Mm.
it's an opportunity. If you have a 30-minute podcast on your site, well, that's probably 3 or 4 thousand words worth of textual content about a very specific topic, and that's of huge benefit from a search engine optimization perspective. Um, the other thing that kind of comes in more on the planning side, because it's a little bit harder to implement when you've got an existing site, is to really think about your page hierarchy within the site overall. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of not using generic terms for your information architecture or main navigation. Instead, use the names of the categories of products that you sell or that you manufacture. Use the names of the services that you offer rather than just saying products, services, and then making people jump down to a subpage to actually find that content. If you're smart about the way that you organize that information, not only are you going to be able to make it much more blatantly obvious what it is that you manufacture, buy, or sell as soon as someone arrives at the page, you're going to get search engine optimization benefit from that because Google likes that you have very specific categories for that information rather than more generic ones like products. Um, and that really helps to ensure that as people are browsing through the site that they can find what it is that they're looking for. And as part of that too, ensuring that as people move down through the content within your site, that you're always using placemaking to enable them to understand very quickly where they are in the overall hierarchy of the site. You can do this through breadcrumbs, where it shows you, you're at home, the product name category, the product name section, and then the spec sheet, and then showing that as a breadcrumb and using alternative highlights and other things within the navigation as you move down through those pages to ensure that people always know where they are and they can quickly navigate laterally within the site and understand exactly what it is that they're doing at that time. The other thing that I would say that's really important is to really limit the amount of PDF content that you use in your site. PDFs are great. Designers love them because it allows them to keep the overall branding and layout things that they can do with those that are maybe a bit more robust than what they're able to do with the web, although that's changed certainly over the last number of years. But PDFs are remarkably inaccessible, and making them accessible is a nightmare. So, if at all possible, you should be looking for any ebooks that you create, make them as web pages. Don't build them out as PDFs that people can download. Make that available as an option, but make sure that all of that content is also available on a basic web page that can be read by a screen reader, can be viewed and searched or indexed by search engines. All of these different things are going to make the site more accessible, but also make your marketing much more, give you much better ROI on your marketing.
So you're saying that the PDF is not easily searchable either, right? With SEO. So the web page for that PDF is a really good idea.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, we actually gave a talk at HubSpot's inbound conference a couple of years ago called Kill the PDF. And it was all about the different reasons why PDFs are a nightmare to use. If you've ever downloaded a PDF on your phone and tried to zoom in to read it, it's just really impossible. But aside from that, it's just a really atrocious format in order to make the content within it accessible. Screen readers have a really hard time with them because they don't know where text starts and stops and they can't read them in appropriate ways. So if you're visually impaired and you've got a screen reader that's trying to read a PDF to you, there's a really good chance you're not going to have any idea what it's actually saying as it's navigating through that document.
Right. So as you say, create the web page that is the PDF, but also have the PDF there if people want to print it and download it. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, this is all about providing alternative ways to access content. So that's, through the web, through a PDF, through audio that reads it to you, through video. It's about creating things that are available to everybody to consume, no matter how they choose to consume it.
Wow. Okay, so one last question that I want you to recap on. Are there particular questions that a company should be asking their web designer or the web designer should be asking the company when they're getting ready to set up their sites for accessibility?
Absolutely. So I think, and we've seen this recently, which is great. I love that we're actually seeing people ask if we build accessible websites. For a really long time, people were asking, do you create responsive websites in order to be accessible for mobile? And that was, that's one step towards accessibility, is ensuring that sites degrade nicely to smaller screens and devices. but they should be asking about, do you develop sites and use the website content accessibility guidelines? To what level do you develop them? Is it A? Is it double A? Is it triple A? Are you thinking about that? What additional costs are there going to be? What additional burdens are there going to be for the marketer in this to craft and write the appropriate captions and alternative text for these different things? Because that's going to take some time on the part of whoever's creating the content to make sure that they're not just writing the body copy, but also ensuring that they have appropriate captions and alt tags for the images. So you really should be delving into that and ensuring that your content and that your budget is going to allow you to do this, but also being able to sell the idea that this extra cost is a benefit to the overall production of the site. So when if you're having to justify the cost of a site and maybe it costs 5 or 10% more than you were expecting as a result of the accessibility measures, being able to prove why that's important to the decision makers and to the purse string holders, is going to be a really important thing. In a lot of cases, it's just simply built in. So, like we don't price anything for a site build that doesn't include this, and we don't break it out as a separate line item. It's just innate in what we do.
Hmm. Wow. Jeff, I have learned a lot today. Thank you very much. And I certainly hope that our listeners have had some light bulbs turn on for them. There's a bunch of things that I will do to the websites that I manage to get them up to speed as quickly as I can right now. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Jeff White is a user experience and usability expert at Kula Partners. And I hope you learned something today that you can take away and start implementing on your website. And if you're starting a new website, maybe you want to you certainly want to get on making it accessible as you start that process. That is our show this week. Thanks so much for listening. Please check out our Twitter and LinkedIn feeds that are on our podcast page, and subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. The Make It Right podcast is brought to you by Kevin Snook, leadership advisor and author of the best-selling book, Make It Right, 5 Steps to Align Your Manufacturing Business from the Front Line to the Bottom Line. I'm Janet Eastman. Thanks for listening to the Make It Right podcast.